Everything is about the future and about if you don't start the children off now with a happy, healthy, stable home, I feel you're setting them up for a bit of a hard time and a fall.
Behind the grand walls of Windsor Castle, something shocking was happening. Camilla had been making secret plans about Prince George without telling William or Catherine. For 3 whole months, meetings happened and decisions were discussed while George's parents had no idea. When William finally discovered the truth, he was furious. How could someone make choices about his son without asking him first? What gave Camilla the right to plan George's future behind closed doors? Join us as we uncover the hidden family drama that nearly tore the royals apart. The discovery. William pulled up to Windsor Castle on a crisp Tuesday morning, expecting nothing more than another typical day of royal duties. He had a meeting scheduled with some senior advisors about upcoming engagements for the autumn season. Nothing unusual, nothing that should have made his stomach turn the way it did when he stepped through those ancient stone corridors. But something felt off the moment he walked in. The staff seemed different, tense. They moved through the hallways with their eyes down, avoiding his gaze in a way that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. These were people he had known for years, people who usually greeted him with warm smiles and easy conversation. Today, they barely acknowledged him at all. William tried to shake off the feeling. Maybe he was imagining things. Maybe he was just tired from the whirlwind schedule he and Catherine had been keeping. But as he made his way toward the meeting room, he passed a cluster of senior courtiers huddled together near one of the side chambers. They were speaking in hushed tones, and the moment they noticed him, they scattered like birds startled by a sudden noise. That was when William knew for certain that something was very wrong. He continued toward his meeting, but his mind was already racing. What were they hiding? What could possibly require this level of secrecy within his own family's home? He had dealt with palace intrigue before. It came with the territory. But this felt different. This felt personal. The meeting itself was strangely brief and superficial. The advisors seemed distracted, rushing through the agenda without their usual attention to detail. They avoided eye contact and wrapped things up in half the time William had expected. He sat there watching them, studying their body language. These were experienced professionals who had served the crown for decades. They did not rattle easily. Yet here they were, practically tripping over themselves to end the meeting and leave the room. William let them go. He did not push. Not yet. He needed to understand what was happening before he made any moves. As he gathered his papers and prepared to leave, one of the younger aides lingered behind. Thomas, quiet man in his early 30s, who had always been respectful and efficient. William had noticed him around the palace for years, but had never had much reason to interact with him directly. Thomas approached slowly, glancing over his shoulder to make sure they were alone. His hand trembled slightly as he pulled a folded document from inside his jacket. He did not say a word. He simply placed it on the table in front of William, met his eyes for just a moment, and then walked quickly toward the door. William stared at the document. His heart was pounding now, though he could not say exactly why. He reached for it, unfolded it, and began to read. The words hit him like a punch to the chest. It was a confidential memo, internal palace correspondence, the kind of document that should never have left the secure offices where it was created. And there, in black and white, was a detailed outline of discussions that had been taking place for weeks. Discussions about George, about his education, about his schedule, about his future role within the monarchy. And every single one of those discussions had been initiated and guided by Camilla. William's hands tightened around the paper as he read further. There were notes from meetings he had never been invited to, decisions that had been suggested without his input, recommendations for changes to George's daily routine that neither he nor Catherine had approved or even been informed about. The memo outlined a proposal to alter George's educational path. Camilla had apparently been advocating for a different approach to his royal training. She wanted him enrolled in certain programs. She wanted him exposed to specific advisors. She had opinions about which school he should attend and when he should begin taking on more formal duties. None of this had been discussed with William. None of it had been run past Catherine. They were George's parents. They were the ones who tucked him in at night and helped him with his homework and listened to his worries about growing up in the public eye. And yet, here was evidence that major decisions about their son's future were being shaped without them. William felt a cold fury rising in his chest. This was not about disagreeing over royal protocol or debating the best approach to modernizing the monarchy. This was about someone going behind his back to influence the life of his child. He read the memo again, slower this time, making sure he understood every detail. The meetings had been going on for 3 months, 3 entire months, and he had known nothing about it. William folded the document carefully and slipped it into his own jacket. His jaw was set. His mind was already working through what needed to happen next. He needed answers, and he needed them now. The secret plan. 3 months earlier, Camilla had sat in her private study at Clarence House with a cup of Earl Grey tea growing cold on the table beside her. She had been thinking about George, about his future, about the weight that would one day rest on his young shoulders. And the more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that something needed to change. She had been queen consort for over a year by then, long enough to understand the inner workings of the institution, long enough to see where the cracks were forming. And in her mind, one of those cracks was the way the younger generation was being prepared for their roles. Camilla believed she had perspective that William and Catherine lacked. She had come into the royal family as an outsider. She had watched it from a distance before becoming part of it. She understood both worlds in a way that people born into the system never could. And that unique position, she felt, gave her insights worth sharing. So she started making phone calls. The first person she reached out to was Sir Malcolm Hendricks, a senior palace advisor who had served 3 generations of royals. He had the king's ear and the respect of everyone who mattered within the institution. Camilla invited him for a private lunch and laid out her concerns. She spoke about modernization, about preparing George not just for the throne he would inherit, but for the world that throne would exist in, a world that was changing faster than the monarchy had ever had to adapt before. She talked about education, about exposure to different perspectives, about the need for the future king to understand the lives of ordinary people in ways previous generations had not. Sir Malcolm listened carefully. He nodded in places. He asked thoughtful questions. And by the end of that lunch, he agreed that her concerns had merit. That was all Camilla needed. One ally, one respected voice to validate her thinking. Over the following weeks, she arranged more meetings, always private, always carefully scheduled when she knew William and Catherine would be occupied with other duties. She met with education consultants who specialized in preparing young people for leadership roles. She spoke with former courtiers who had watched previous heirs grow up and had opinions about what had worked and what had not. She compiled a list of recommendations. George should attend a different school than his parents were considering, one with a more international student body, one that would expose him to different cultures and perspectives from a younger age. She believed Eton was too traditional, too insular. She wanted something more progressive. She also had ideas about his royal training schedule. She thought George should begin attending certain ceremonial functions earlier than planned. Not the big public events, but smaller, more intimate gatherings where he could observe and learn. She wanted him to sit in on charity meetings, to understand the business side of royal patronages, to see how decisions were made and how the family's influence was wielded behind the scenes. In Camilla's mind, all of this was for George's benefit. She genuinely believed she was helping. She had no children of her own who would ever be king, no personal stake in the line of succession beyond wanting the institution to survive and thrive. Her motivations, at least to herself, seemed pure, but there was another layer to it that she did not fully acknowledge. Camilla had spent years being criticized, years of being compared unfavorably to Diana, years of being seen as the outsider who did not belong. Now, finally, she had a title, she had a position. She was queen consort, and that meant something. It meant she had authority. It meant her voice should carry weight in decisions about the family's future. And perhaps deep down she wanted to prove that she belonged, that she could contribute something meaningful. that her presence in the family was not just tolerated, but valuable. So the meetings continued. The plans took shape. Documents were drafted outlining proposed changes to George's schedule and education. Camilla presented these to a select group of senior advisors, carefully choosing people she thought would be receptive to her ideas. The response was mixed. Some of the older courtiers appreciated her initiative. They saw a queen consort taking an active interest in the next generation. They respected her willingness to think strategically about the monarchy's future. Others were uncomfortable. They sensed that she was overstepping. They knew that decisions about the children of the Prince and Princess of Wales should not be made without William and Catherine's involvement. But Camilla had been clever about how she framed everything. She never presented her ideas as final decisions. She always couched them as suggestions, proposals for consideration, thoughts worth exploring, and she always emphasized that, of course, William and Catherine would be consulted eventually. Once the ideas were more fully developed, once there was a complete plan to present, why bother them with rough drafts and preliminary thinking? It was a delicate dance. And for 3 months, Camilla managed to keep it going without William or Catherine finding out. But secrets in palaces never stay buried forever. Too many people know too many things, and eventually someone always talks. Catherine uncovers the truth. Catherine noticed the change in George before anyone else did. It was subtle at first. Small things that a mother picks up on even when no one else would notice. He seemed distracted during dinner, a little quieter than usual. He would start to say something and then stop himself as if he was not sure whether he should speak up. At first, she thought it was just the normal stress of school. George was at that age where everything felt complicated. Friends, homework, the constant awareness that his life was different from everyone else's. Catherine had been watching for signs of that pressure since he was old enough to understand what being a prince really meant. But this felt different somehow. One evening, about 2 weeks after Camilla's secret meetings had reached their peak, George came home from what was supposed to be a standard tutoring session at the palace. Catherine was in the kitchen helping Charlotte with a school project when George wandered in. He had that look on his face, the one that meant something was bothering him, but he did not know how to bring it up. Catherine set down the glue stick she was holding and gave him her full attention. She asked him how his day went. Normal question, the kind she asked every day. George shrugged, said it was fine. But then he added something that made Catherine's internal radar ping. He mentioned that one of the palace officials had asked him questions about what kind of subjects he wanted to study next year, what kind of activities he might be interested in, whether he had thought about which school he wanted to attend after his current one. Catherine felt a small flutter of concern in her chest. She and William had not authorized anyone to have those conversations with George. They had their own timeline for discussing his educational future. They had their own plans for when and how to involve him in those decisions. She kept her voice casual, asked George who exactly had been talking to him. He named a senior advisor, someone who worked closely with Charles and Camilla, someone who had no business discussing George's future without his parents present. Catherine did not let her alarm show on her face. She simply smiled at George and told him that was nice. But if anyone wanted to talk to him about important things like school, he should let her or his father know first. George nodded and wandered off to play with Louis, completely unaware that he had just handed his mother a thread that would unravel everything. Over the next few days, Catherine paid closer attention. She started noticing other small irregularities. George's schedule had been adjusted without her approval. Not dramatically, just little changes here and there, an extra meeting added, a tutor showing up on a day that was supposed to be free. Time shifted around to accommodate sessions she had never agreed to. She started asking questions, polite questions, professional questions, the kind that did not immediately set off alarms but that required people to explain themselves. And the more questions she asked, the more uncomfortable responses she got. Staff members became evasive. They gave vague answers about coordinating with various offices. They mentioned approvals from senior officials without specifying which ones. Catherine had been part of this family long enough to recognize when she was being handled, when people were being careful about what they told her. and that recognition made her dig deeper. She reached out to Margaret, one of the long-serving staff members she had always trusted, someone who had been with the family since before William and Catherine were married, someone who had always been honest with her, even when the truth was uncomfortable. They met for tea, just the two of them, and Catherine asked the question directly. Was something going on with George that she should know about? Were decisions being made without her input? Margaret hesitated. Catherine could see the conflict on her face, the loyalty to the institution warring with the loyalty to the family, with the knowledge that a mother had the right to know what was happening with her own child. Finally, Margaret spoke. She told Catherine about the meetings, about Camilla's initiative, about the proposals that had been circulating among senior advisors for weeks. She did not have all the details. She was not senior enough to be invited into those conversations, but she had heard enough, seen enough, pieced together enough to know that something significant was happening behind the scenes, and it all centered on George. Catherine felt a cold shock run through her body. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a simple miscommunication or scheduling error. This was a deliberate, sustained effort to shape her son's future without consulting her or William. She kept her composure, thanked Margaret for her honesty, and the moment she was alone, she pulled out her phone. William was away on a 3-day tour of northern England. Official visits, factory openings, hospital dedications, the kind of duties he could not easily cancel or walk away from. But this could not wait. Catherine typed out a message, short, clear, and urgent. "We need to talk about George. Something's happened. Call me as soon as you can." She hit send and waited. The confrontation begins. William canceled the rest of his tour. He made up some excuse about a family matter requiring his immediate attention, which was not really a lie. The palace press office scrambled to reschedule his appearances, but William did not care. The moment Catherine told him what she had discovered, nothing else mattered. He drove straight to Clarence's house, did not call ahead, did not schedule a meeting through proper channels, just showed up and walked through the doors like a storm rolling in off the sea. Charles was in the drawing room with Camilla when William arrived. They were having afternoon tea, discussing some upcoming engagement, the picture of calm domesticity. William's entrance shattered that calm in an instant. Charles looked up, surprised to see his son. He started to say something about not expecting him, but the expression on William's face stopped him cold. This was not a social visit. This was not a father and son catching up over tea. William got straight to the point. He wanted to know about the meetings, about the plans, about every single conversation that had taken place regarding George without his knowledge or consent. Charles blinked, glanced at Camilla. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, recognition, maybe guilt. He had known about some of this, maybe not all of it, but enough. Enough that he should have said something to William, enough that his silence made him complicit. Camilla set down her teacup with a delicate clink. She did not look rattled, did not look caught. She looked composed, almost defiant, like she had been expecting this confrontation and had already prepared her defense. She started to explain. Her voice was measured and calm. She talked about wanting what was best for George, about her years of experience observing the royal family, about the insights she could offer as someone who came from outside the institution. She framed everything as concern, as a grandmother figure looking out for her step-grandson's future. But William was not buying it. He cut through her careful words with a simple truth. George was his son. Catherine was George's mother. Any decisions about George's life, his education, his future went through them first, not through advisors, not through other family members, not through a step-grandmother who had been in the family for barely 20 years. The room went silent after that. The air felt thick, charged. Charles tried to step in. He tried to mediate. He suggested that everyone was acting with good intentions, that perhaps there had been a miscommunication, that Camilla was only trying to help, and surely William could see that her heart was in the right place. But William was not interested in intentions. He was interested in actions, and the actions spoke clearly. Camilla had gone behind his back. She had organized meetings without his knowledge. She had made proposals about his child's future without consulting him. That was not help. That was interference. William's voice rose, not shouting but firm, unmistakably. He accused Camilla of overstepping boundaries, of undermining his and Catherine's authority as parents, of treating George like a royal asset to be managed rather than a child. Camilla pushed back. She insisted that as queen consort she had a responsibility to think about the institution, about continuity, about preparing the next generation for the challenges they would face. She had a duty to the monarchy that went beyond individual family dynamics. That was when William played his trump card. He reminded Camilla that she was queen consort, not queen, that she had no constitutional authority over the heir to the throne, that her title did not give her the right to make decisions about his children. Charles stood between them now, literally and figuratively, his wife on one side, his son on the other, the woman he loved and the future of his family. He looked older in that moment, tired, caught in an impossible position. He asked William to calm down, to sit, to discuss this rationally. But William was done discussing. He had come for answers and he had gotten them. Now he wanted something else. He wanted a promise, a guarantee that this would never happen again. And until he got it, as far as he was concerned, nothing else mattered. Palace divided. Word spread through the palace like wildfire. Not through official channels, of course. Never through official channels, but staff talk. Whenever the Prince of Wales storms into Clarence House and emerges 2 hours later looking like thunder, people notice. By the next morning, everyone who mattered knew that something had fractured within the family. The details were fuzzy. Most people only had pieces of the story, but the general shape of it was clear enough. William and Camilla were at odds. Charles was caught in the middle. And whatever had happened, it was serious. The palace staff began choosing sides almost immediately. Not openly, not in any way that could be traced back to them, but in the quiet ways that institutional politics always play out. In which meetings they attended, which memos they responded to quickly, and which ones they let sit, whose calls they returned first. The younger staff members, the ones who had come up during William and Catherine's time, largely aligned with the Prince and Princess of Wales. They saw William as the future. They respected Catherine's hands-on approach to parenting, and they found the idea of someone making decisions about George without his parents' knowledge fundamentally wrong. Parents were parents, royal or not. But the older generation of courtiers saw things differently. They had served the monarchy for decades. They understood that the institution sometimes required decisions that went beyond individual family preferences. They respected Camilla's position as queen consort, and while they agreed that perhaps she should have been more transparent, they also believed her perspective had value. Sir Malcolm Hendricks found himself in an uncomfortable position. He had been one of the first people Camilla brought into her confidence. He had validated her concerns, encouraged her thinking. Now he realized that his support might have given her the green light to go further than he had intended. He tried to walk a careful line, defending Camilla's intentions while acknowledging that the execution had been flawed. But William was not interested in nuance. As far as William was concerned, you were either with him on this or you were against him, and Sir Malcolm's attempts at diplomacy only made him look like he was trying to have it both ways. The tension created strange dynamics throughout the palace offices. Meetings became awkward. People who normally worked together smoothly suddenly found reasons not to collaborate. Information flow slowed down as staff members worried about whose hands their reports might end up in. Some advisors started documenting everything, writing detailed memos about conversations, creating paper trails that would protect them if things got worse. Others went the opposite direction, having more discussions off the record where nothing could be traced. The media had not caught wind of the full story yet, but they sensed something was off. Royal reporters started noting that William and Camilla had not been photographed together in 3 weeks. Not at any public events, not at any family gatherings. The official explanation was conflicting schedules, but the reporters were not buying it. Photographers began staking out known royal locations, hoping to catch something, anything, a tense interaction, a cold shoulder. The kind of moment that would confirm what everyone was starting to suspect. What made everything worse was the timing. There were major royal events coming up, a state visit, several charity galas. public appearances where the whole family was expected to present a united front. The kind of occasions where personal conflicts had to be set aside for the sake of the institution. But nobody knew if that would be possible anymore. Nobody knew if William and Camilla could stand next to each other and smile for the cameras when there was this much unresolved anger between them. Charles found himself making phone calls he never wanted to make, trying to convince William to attend family functions, trying to convince Camilla to be more conciliatory, trying to hold together a family that was fracturing along fault lines he had not even known existed. And in the middle of all of it, relatively few people stopped to think about what this was doing to George, the boy at the center of the storm, the child who had become a point of contention between adults who should have been protecting him, not fighting over him. The ultimatum. William gave his father 48 hours, 2 days to sort this out. 2 days for Camilla to acknowledge what she had done and promise it would never happen again. After that, William made it clear things would change in ways that nobody wanted. He laid out his demands in a private meeting with Charles, just the two of them, no advisors, no staff members hovering nearby taking notes. Father and son having the kind of conversation they should have been able to have without all the formality and protocol. William's position was simple. Camilla needed to apologize, not some vague statement about misunderstandings or good intentions gone wrong. A real apology that acknowledged she had overstepped, that she had made decisions about his child without his permission, that she had violated his trust as a parent and undermined his authority as the future king. And beyond the apology, William wanted guarantees. He wanted it made explicitly clear to every single person who worked within the palace system that decisions about his children went through him and Catherine. Period. No exceptions. No backdoor conversations. No well-meaning initiatives that bypassed the actual parents. If Camilla could not agree to those terms, William told his father, then he would be forced to take action. He would limit George's participation in royal events, pull him back from certain functions where Camilla would be present, create distance between his children and their step-grandmother until proper boundaries were established and respected. Charles heard his son out. He understood William's anger. As a father himself, he could see how violated William must feel, but he also saw Camilla's side. She had not acted out of malice. She genuinely believed she was helping, and asking her to apologize felt, to Charles, like asking her to admit she had done something terrible when her intentions had been good. He tried to explain this to William, tried to find some middle ground where both sides could feel heard and respected, but William was not interested in middle ground. Not on this. Some things did not have a middle ground. You either respected someone's role as a parent or you did not. Back at Kensington Palace, Catherine was having her own reckoning with the situation. She had been the calmer presence initially, the one who encouraged William to talk things through rather than react in anger. But as the days passed and no real resolution emerged, Catherine's patience wore thin. She had always tried to give Camilla the benefit of the doubt, had always been diplomatic in public, had worked hard to present a united family front despite the complicated history. But this crossed a line that Catherine could not ignore. These were her children, her babies, and someone had been making plans for them without even bothering to ask what she thought, without considering that maybe, just maybe, a mother might have insights into what was best for her own son. Catherine made it clear to William that she stood completely behind his position. If anything, she felt he was not being firm enough. She wanted stronger guarantees, wanted consequences for the staff members who had participated in the secret meetings, wanted everyone to understand that what had happened was not acceptable and would not be tolerated. Together, William and Catherine presented a united front that was unshakable. They were not just a prince and princess fighting for protocol. They were parents protecting their child. And that gave them a moral authority that transcended royal hierarchy. Charles found himself in an impossible position. His son was right. He knew William was right. But he also loved his wife. He had fought for years to be with Camilla, had weathered public criticism and family disapproval to make her his queen. Now his son was asking him to essentially choose between them. Camilla, for her part, was not backing down as quickly as Charles hoped she would. She maintained that she had done nothing wrong, that her actions were within the scope of her role, that William was overreacting and making this into something bigger than it needed to be. But she was also beginning to realize that her stubbornness might cost her something she did not want to lose: her relationship with her stepson, her place within the family, her ability to be part of George's life going forward. The 48 hours ticked down, and nobody knew what would happen when the deadline arrived. George caught in the middle. George knew something was wrong. Kids always know. They pick up on the tension in a room even when the adults think they are hiding it. They notice the forced smiles and the conversations that stop abruptly when they walk in. They feel the shift in energy at family gatherings. For George, it started with the little things. His grandmother and step-grandfather had always made a point of including him in family dinners at Clarence's house. It was their tradition. Once every 2 weeks, he and Charlotte and Louis would go over for a meal. Charles would ask about school. Camilla would have the cook make their favorite desserts. It was comfortable and easy. But those dinners had stopped. No explanation given. Just vague mentions of busy schedules and conflicting commitments. George was 11 years old enough to know that busy schedules did not explain why something that had happened regularly for years suddenly stopped happening at all. Then there were the family events, the public ones where everyone had to show up and smile for the cameras. George had been to enough of these to recognize the difference between real warmth and performance. And lately, when his father and Camilla were in the same room, everything felt like performance. They were polite to each other, too polite, the kind of careful politeness that people use when they are angry but cannot show it. George had seen his father interact with people he genuinely liked. This was not that. One afternoon, George worked up the courage to ask his mother what was going on. Why did things feel weird at family gatherings? Why had the dinners at Clarence's house stopped? Was everyone okay? Catherine felt her heart break a little when he asked. She had been trying so hard to shield him from this, to keep the adult conflicts separate from his daily life. But of course he noticed. Of course he felt it. She told him that sometimes adults disagreed about things, that it did not mean anyone was in danger or that the family was falling apart, just that there were some conversations happening that needed to be worked through. She kept it vague, age-appropriate, but George was not satisfied with vague answers. He pushed back gently, asked if it was about him, if he had done something wrong. And Catherine had to fight to keep her voice steady as she assured him that nothing about this was his fault, that he was perfect and wonderful and had done absolutely nothing to cause any problems. But the reassurance only went so far, because George was not stupid. He had heard his name mentioned in hushed conversations, had noticed the way certain staff members looked uncomfortable when he walked into rooms where they had clearly been talking about him. He knew on some level that whatever was happening involved him, even if it was not his fault. The uncertainty gnawed at him. He became quieter at school. His teachers noticed. One of them mentioned to Catherine that George seemed distracted lately, less engaged in class, more withdrawn during breaks. At home, he started having trouble sleeping. He would lie awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios in his mind, trying to piece together what was happening from the fragments of information he had picked up, worrying about things an 11-year-old should not have to worry about. William noticed his son pulling away, becoming more reserved, and it made his blood boil. This was exactly what he had been trying to prevent. This was why boundaries mattered, why parents needed to be the ones making decisions about their children's lives. Because when adults let their conflicts spill over into kids' worlds, this was what happened. George started asking fewer questions about royal duties, started seeming less interested in the family traditions that had always fascinated him before. William worried that they were watching their son lose his connection to the very institution he would one day lead. Not because he did not care, but because the adults around him had made it feel unsafe and complicated. Catherine found George sitting alone in the garden one evening, just sitting, staring at nothing. When she asked if he wanted company, he shrugged in that way kids do when they want to say yes but do not know how to ask for what they need. She sat beside him, did not push him to talk, just stayed close, let him know she was there. Eventually, George leaned against her shoulder, still silent, still processing things he was too young to fully understand. And Catherine wrapped her arm around him and wished desperately that the adults in his life could find a way to put him first. The resolution. Charles made the call on the morning of the third day. The deadline had passed, and he could not let this go any further. He arranged a private meeting at Windsor Castle, just the four of them, Charles and Camilla, William and Catherine. No advisors, no staff, no witnesses to whatever needed to be said. They gathered in one of the smaller private rooms, the kind of space where the family had handled delicate conversations for generations. The walls had probably absorbed more secrets and conflicts than anyone could count. Now they would absorb one more. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. William and Catherine sat on one side, Charles and Camilla on the other, like opposing teams preparing for negotiation, which in a way they were. Charles spoke first. He had spent the last 72 hours thinking about nothing else, talking to Camilla, talking to trusted advisors off the record, trying to find a path through this mess that would not destroy his family. And he had come to a conclusion that surprised even himself. He told William that he was right, that as a father, Charles understood the violation William felt. Decisions about George, Charlotte, and Louis belonged to their parents first and foremost, that whatever Camilla's intentions had been, the execution had been wrong, and that it could not happen again. But Camilla was also pragmatic. She understood that she had miscalculated, that her approach had backfired spectacularly, and that continuing to dig in would only make things worse. She had pushed for influence and instead had lost ground. Now she needed to find a way back. She turned to William and Catherine. Her voice was measured, controlled. She acknowledged that she should have come to them first, that no matter how much experience she had or how valid her concerns might have been, George was their son, and they deserved to be part of every conversation about his future. It was not the full apology William had demanded, not quite, but it was closer than he had expected to get. Camilla did not apologize for caring or for having opinions, but she did apologize for the method, for the secrecy, for making William and Catherine feel undermined in their own home. Catherine spoke next. Her voice was quiet but firm. She made it clear that this was not just about one incident. It was about establishing boundaries going forward. She needed to know that her children would not be discussed in meetings she was not part of. Those proposals about their lives would not be developed without her input. That her role as their mother would be respected by everyone in the family. Camilla nodded, agreed, and promised that any future concerns or suggestions would come directly to William and Catherine first. That she would not use her position to work around them or go through channels they were not aware of. Charles added his own commitment. He promised to make it explicitly clear to all palace staff that the chain of authority regarding the Wales children was non-negotiable. William and Catherine were the decision-makers. Anyone who wanted to propose changes or raise concerns needed to go through proper channels, and those proper channels started and ended with the children's parents. But Catherine was not quite finished. She wanted one more thing. She wanted the staff members who had participated in the secret meetings to understand that what had happened was not acceptable, not as a punishment, but as a message, to make sure everyone understood that the rules had changed and would be enforced. Charles agreed to personally speak to each person involved, make it clear that while no one would be fired or formally disciplined, the behavior could not be repeated. That loyalty to the institution meant respecting the family structure, not undermining it. Camilla and William would need time. They would need to prove to each other that the agreements made today would actually hold, that this was not just words to smooth over conflict, but actual change. Catherine felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She had been running on adrenaline and protective instinct for days. Now that the confrontation was over, she just felt tired. But there was also relief. Her children would be protected. The boundaries were clear. And while the relationships might be strained for a while, at least everyone knew where they stood. As they left Windsor Castle that afternoon, William reached for Catherine's hand. They had fought for their children, had stood their ground, had demanded the respect they deserved as parents, and they had won, not perfectly, not without cost, but they had won. The palace would adjust, the staff would learn, and Camilla would have to earn back the trust she had lost. But the most important thing had been accomplished. George would be protected. His childhood would be guarded, and his parents would be the ones making decisions about his life. That was all that really mattered. And if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.